7 years ago, Rachel Moore vanished from a life that wasn't supposed to exist. She'd been a shadow in Deep Unit 9, a reflex kill specialist whose name was scrubbed from every record after her final mission. That day, she stood in her tiny apartment, the air thick with dust motes, staring at a single photo, her old Team 5 faces blurred by time and a coffee stain that had bled into the edges. She traced her finger over the image, her hand steady, but her chest tight, then tucked it into a drawer. She pulled on a plain white shirt, its collar slightly frayed, and swore she'd never touch a gun again. Promises like that, though, don't hold up. Life has a way of dragging you back like a tide you can't outrun. On a sweltering July afternoon in a small Virginia town, Rachel stepped into a gun shop, her black hair loose, and tangled her sneakers worn to the soles, her face bare of any makeup. The bell above the door jingled sharp and out of place, and every head in the room turned. 3 men at the counter burst out laughing. "You planning to buy a gun to stir-fry veggies?" One of them called, his voice dripping with mockery. With her wrinkled button-down shirt, faded khaki pants, and a canvas wallet clutched under her arm, everyone assumed she was a country girl who'd wandered into the wrong place. A clerk pointed at a Glock and sneered, "You even know how to unlock the safety before trying." Rachel didn't blink. She picked up the pistol, stripped every part in 4 seconds flat, then said, her voice like a cold blade, "Barrels off by 0. 4 mm. The shop went silent because that kind of speed, that kind of precision only comes from operatives trained in Deep Unit 9. The air in the shop turned heavy like someone had sucked out the oxygen. The 3 men college kids, probably with gelled hair, tight polos, and smirks that screamed privilege, exchanged glances, their laughter faltering. The loud one sporting a gold chain that glinted under the fluorescent lights leaned on the counter, his elbows smudging the glass. "Okay, sweetheart," he said, dragging out the word like it was a punchline. "Wrong shop. Bakery's next door." His buddies snickered, but it was forced now, like they sensed something wasn't right. Rachel didn't look at them. She ran her eyes over the wall of firearms, her gaze steady but distant, like she was seeing through the weapons to a memory no one else could touch. She pointed at a Glock 19, her finger calm, deliberate. "I want to try this one," she said, her voice low, like she was asking for a glass of water. The shopkeeper, Marty, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a name tag pinned crooked on his vest, snorted. "You even know where the safety is before touching it." His tone was sharp, like he was scolding a kid who'd wandered in by mistake. The other customers, 2 older men in camo hats, their faces weathered like old barn wood, a woman flipping through a gun magazine, and a guy in a security uniform with a badge that gleamed too brightly glanced up. Their expressions mixed amusement with pity, like they were watching someone about to make a fool of themselves. A teenage girl, barely 16, stood near the back, her phone half raised like she was about to record the scene. Her braces glinted as she whispered to her friend, a lanky kid with acne and a backwards cap. "Look at her," she said, her voice loud enough to carry. "She thinks she's in some action movie, but she's dressed like she's homeless." The friend snickered, pulling out his own phone, his fingers already tapping to start a live stream. Rachel paused, her hand hovering over the Glock 19, and turned her head just enough to meet the girl's eyes. The teenager froze her phone, dipping slightly, but she recovered fast, tossing her hair and muttering, "What?" "I'm just saying." Rachel didn't respond. She picked up the Glock again, her movements fluid like water over stone. She disassembled it a second time, this time slower, deliberate, letting each click of the parts echo in the quiet shop. When she set it down, the barrel aligned perfectly. She tapped the counter twice, her nail making a faint, sharp sound. The teenager's friend stopped recording, his thumb hesitating over the screen. The room felt smaller, like Rachel's silence was taking up space. Before we keep going, if this story's hitting you, maybe you've been laughed at, maybe you've been sized up and dismissed for just being you, take a quick second. Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment about where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. It's just a small way to join us, to say you're walking through this moment with us, feeling the weight of it. Your support keeps these stories alive, keeps us connected through the heartbreak and the healing. The silence after Rachel's second disassembly hung like a held breath, but Marty wasn't ready to let it go. He leaned over the counter, his eyes narrowing, his voice dripping with challenge. "All right, show off," he said, loud enough to pull every eye in the room. That was a neat trick. "Let's see you do it again." Or was that just luck? The college guys laughed, their confidence creeping back, though it sounded thin, like they were trying to convince themselves. Trevor, the one with the gold chain, leaned in, his eyes glinting. "What's next, lady? You gonna juggle knives?" The room chuckled, the sound, sharp and mean, like they were all in on the joke. Rachel didn't flinch. She picked up the Glock 19 again, her movement smooth, almost bored, like she'd done this in places these people couldn't imagine. She released the safety, checked the chamber, and stripped the slide one-handed like it was nothing. 4 seconds, maybe less. She set it down, nudged the barrel slightly, and tapped the counter, once her nail clicking against the glass. "Still off," she said, her voice so quiet it barely carried, but it landed like a stone in still water. The laughter died. One of the older men in a camo hat, his hands calloused and his face creased like old leather, leaned forward. "I've never seen that done that fast," he whispered to the guy next to him. "Not outside movies. That's special ops stuff." A woman in a sleek blazer, her hair pulled into a tight bun, stood near the ammo display, her lips pursed like she was judging a contest. She'd been quiet until now, but she stepped forward, her heels clicking on the floor. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice crisp like she was used to being heard. "You're wasting everyone's time with this performance." She waved a manicured hand at Rachel's wrinkled shirt, her tone dripping with disdain. "If you're so good, why don't you show us something real? Or are you just here to play pretend?" The room murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Rachel didn't look at her. She reached for a cleaning kit on the counter, opened it, and started wiping down the Glock slide, her movements precise, almost meditative. Each swipe of the cloth was deliberate, like she was erasing the woman's words. The blazer lady's face tightened, her arms crossing as she waited for a response that never came. Rachel finished, set the cloth down, and said, "I'm not here to perform." The words were soft, but they carried a weight that made the woman step back, her heels catching slightly on the floor. The mood in the shop shifted like a storm cloud rolling in slow. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air felt charged like the moment before a lightning strike. Marty's smirk faded, but he wasn't ready to let it go. He jerked his thumb toward the door to the indoor range, a heavy metal slab with a faded range sign. "Okay, fine," he said, his voice louder now, like he needed to own the room again. "You know your way around a gun? Big deal. Doesn't mean you can shoot." The woman with the magazine, Claire, looked up, her eyebrows raised, a faint smirk tugging at her lips like she was watching a drama she'd paid for. Rachel didn't hesitate. "All right," she said, her voice calm, like she was agreeing to check the time. She scanned the wall again, her eyes landing on an old Colt revolver, its finish, dull, its grip worn smooth from years of hands. "That one," she said, pointing. The room erupted in laughter again, louder this time, like they'd been waiting for her to slip. "Not going for the automatics," Trevor said, grinning like he'd won something. "What, your arm's too weak for recoil?" Marty muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "She probably won't even hit the wood frame." A middle-aged man in a hunting jacket, his beard flecked with gray, had been leaning against a display case, watching silently. He stepped forward now, his boots heavy on the floor, and pointed at Rachel's sneakers, the soles peeling at the edges. "Look at her," he said, his voice gruff, like he was calling out a bluff. "You think you belong here? You look like you can't even afford a decent pair of shoes, let alone a gun." The crowd murmured, some laughing, others nodding, like he'd said what they were all thinking. Rachel's hand paused on the Colt, her fingers brushing the grip like she was testing its weight. She turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes, and held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. The man shifted his bravado, flickering, but he pressed on. "Go on, pick it up. Let's see you make a fool of yourself." Rachel lifted the Colt, checked it with a glance, and walked toward the range door, her steps slow but sure, like she was walking into a room she already owned. The crowd followed their whispers, buzzing like static. The range smelled of gunpowder and metal, the air cool and heavy, the walls lined with soundproofing foam that swallowed their voices. Rachel stood at the firing line, her feet square, her eyes narrowing slightly like she was sizing up an old friend or an old enemy. The target was 50 feet out, a standard silhouette already scarred with holes from other shooters, its edges curling slightly. Trevor and his buddies crowded behind her, their whispers turning to bets. $10. She misses the whole thing. One said, his voice smug. Claire stood nearby, her arms crossed, her smirk sharper now, like she was rooting for Rachel to fail. Derek, the security guard, leaned against the wall, his badge glinting under the lights, his face hard like he was waiting for her to prove him right. Rachel loaded the Colt, her hands moving with a precision that made the whispers falter. She took a slow breath, raised the gun, and stood still. No theatrics, no hesitation, just a quiet focus that seemed to pull the air out of the room. A young guy in a hoodie who'd been quiet until now snorted from the back. Bet she flinches at the recoil, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Rachel's lips twitched, not quite a smile, and she adjusted her grip, her fingers settling like they had been molded to the gun. The target rolled back, and the shop went dead silent. 5 shots all through the same tight cluster in the center of the silhouette. The holes overlapped so perfectly, it looked like one bullet had torn through, leaving a single clean wound. Marty's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering on the counter, the sound sharp in the stillness. Claire let out a low whistle, her magazine forgotten, her smirk gone. Trevor's mouth hung open, his gold chain catching the light as he shifted uncomfortably. Rachel lowered the Colt, her face blank like she'd just finished folding laundry. She turned to Marty and said, "I need 2 boxes of 9mm rounds and a left eye patch." Her voice was soft, but it cut through the silence like a blade sharp and sure. The veteran in the camo hat, his hands gripping the counter, stared at her, his eyes wide. "That's special ops training," he said almost to himself. "No one else shoots like that." The guy in the hoodie backed up his hands in his pockets, his bravado gone. Rachel handed the Colt back to Marty, her fingers brushing the barrel one last time, like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. Back in the main shop, a woman in her 60s, her hair dyed. A brassy blonde stood by the door, clutching a purse that looked too expensive for the room. She'd been watching Rachel since she walked in, her lips tight, her eyes narrow. Now she spoke, her voice loud and accusing. "You're just showing off," she said, pointing a finger at Rachel. "People like you come in here acting like you're something special, wasting everyone's time." The room turned, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. "Why don't you go back to wherever you came from?" The woman added, her purse swinging slightly as she gestured. Rachel paused, her hand on the counter, and turned to face her. She didn't raise her voice, didn't move closer. She just tilted her head slightly and said, "I'm here to buy what I need." "Same as you." The simplicity of it, the calm, made the woman's face flush red. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her purse clutched tighter as she turned away. The room felt heavier, like Rachel's words had settled into everyone's bones. The energy in the shop was electric now, but not everyone was ready to back down. Derek, the security guard, pushed through the crowd, his uniform crisp, his badge shining like he thought it gave him the upper hand. "I don't buy it," he said, his voice loud, almost shouting like he needed to drown out the doubt in his own head. "No way someone like her is a real marksman." He gestured at her wrinkled shirt, her scuffed sneakers, her canvas wallet that looked like it had been through a war of its own. "What's your deal?" "Got a license." "Military record." "Ever compete in a single tournament?" His words were meant to cut, to bring her down to size, and the room leaned in, waiting for her to crumble under the weight of his challenge. Rachel didn't answer right away. She set the Colt down, her fingers lingering on the grip for a moment, like she was remembering a weight she'd carried for years, a weight no one in that room could see. An old man in the corner, his face half hidden under a faded baseball cap, kept staring at her, his hands trembling slightly. He leaned toward the veteran next to him and murmured, "She." Looks like the one who saved my unit at border post K-219. His voice was shaky, like he was pulling a memory from a fog that had settled years ago. Marty waved him off, his voice sharp. No ID, no proof, he said. Just an act. A young clerk barely out of high school stood behind the counter, his hands fidgeting with a stack of receipts. He'd been quiet watching Rachel with wide eyes, but now he spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. Come on, lady, he said, trying to sound tough, but failing. You're making us look bad. Why don't you just admit you're faking it? The room murmured, some laughing, others nodding like he'd hit the nail on the head. Rachel turned to him, her eyes steady, and picked up a single bullet from the counter. She held it between her fingers, rolling it slowly, letting the light catch its brass casing. This isn't about you, she said, her voice low, but clear, like she was speaking to him alone. The clerk's hands froze on the receipts, his face paling, as he realized she'd turned his challenge back on him without raising her voice. The veteran in the camo hat nodded slowly like he was piecing something together. The room shifted, the air growing tighter, like everyone was waiting for the next move. The bell above the door jingled sharp and sudden, and the room turned. Two men in dark suits stepped inside, their faces blank, their movements precise, like they had been trained to take up as little space as possible while commanding every inch of it. They didn't look at Marty, or Trevor, or Claire. They walked straight to Rachel, stood at attention, and one of them handed her a letter, its envelope plain but heavy with purpose. Recall order from the Department of Defense, he said, his voice low but clear, cutting through the shop like a wire. The other man saluted her, sharp and formal, his hand steady as stone. The room froze. Marty stammered, his voice breaking the silence. Wait, recall order. Rachel opened the letter, scanned it with a glance, and nodded. Anshadad. I'll leave in 10 minutes, she said, folding the paper and tucking it into her wallet, her movements calm like she was picking up a receipt. Let me grab a few more mags. She moved to the counter, her steps unhurried like she was buying milk, not answering a call from the government. A man in a flannel shirt, his glasses smudged and his hair thinning, had been standing near the back watching quietly. Now he stepped forward, his voice low but shaking with anger. This is some kind of stunt, isn't it? He said, pointing at Rachel. You come in here looking like that, acting like you're better than us. Who do you think you are? The room murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Rachel didn't look at him. She reached for the ammo boxes, stacking them neatly on the counter, her fingers moving with the same precision she'd shown with the Glock. She paused just for a moment and said, I'm just here to do what I need to do. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made the man step back, his glasses slipping slightly as he blinked. The suits by the door didn't move, their eyes fixed on Rachel like they were waiting for her to finish what she'd started. The shop was a graveyard of stunned faces. Trevor and his buddies stared at the floor, their hands stuffed in their pockets, their earlier bravado gone like smoke. Claire closed her magazine slowly, her fingers lingering on the pages, her smirk replaced by something uneasy. Derek took a step back, his badge suddenly feeling heavy like it was weighing him down. Rachel paid for her ammo and the eye patch, her canvas wallet creased and worn, its zipper catching slightly as she opened it. Her fingers were steady as she counted out the bills, each one crinkled but precise, like she'd done this in 100 different places under 100 different names. The old man in the baseball cap stood up, his hands trembling, his eyes locked on her. It was you, wasn't it? SSE, he said, his voice breaking like he was afraid to hope. K-219. You pulled us out. I never forgot your face. Rachel didn't look at him. She zipped her wallet, slung it under her arm, and said, You're welcome. 2 words, soft but final, like a gate swinging shut. The suits stood by the door, waiting, their faces unreadable. The veteran in the camo hat shook his head, muttering, She's not just somebody. She's the one. A woman in a denim jacket, her hair streaked with gray, had been browsing holsters near the counter. She turned now, her eyes narrowing as she looked Rachel up and down. You think you can just walk in here and act like you own the place? She said, her voice sharp like she was defending her territory. People like you don't belong in a shop like this. The room stirred some nodding others, looking away like they didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. Rachel set her ammo down, her hand resting on the boxes for a moment, like she was grounding herself. She looked at the woman, her gaze steady but not unkind, and said, "I'm here for the same reason you are. To get what I need and leave." The woman's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond, her hands fidgeting with the holster she'd been holding. The room felt tighter, like Rachel's calm was a weight pressing down on everyone's chest. Outside, the summer heat pressed down thick and unrelenting, but inside, the shop was cold like the air was holding its breath. Trevor, his confidence shattered, tried to save face. "Why is someone like you even walking around free?" he shouted, his voice cracking like he was grasping at straws. "If you're so dangerous, why dress like a nobody and walk the streets?" The room turned to Rachel, waiting for her to snap, to explain herself, to give them something to hold on to. She paused, her hand on the door, and looked at him for 2 seconds, long enough to make him shrink, his shoulders hunching under her gaze. "Do you know what freedom means?" She said, her voice steady, like she was asking about the weather. "I spent 12 years making sure people like you get to mock people like me in peace." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap, heavy and final. Someone in the back whispered, "She's a legend." They wiped her record after Operation White Decoy. Rachel didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. She just said, "I don't need to prove anything," and pushed the door open, the bell jingling as she stepped into the heat. A man in a trucker hat, his face red from too many hours in the sun, had been standing near the exit, his arms crossed. He spoke now, his voice loud and accusing. "You're just trying to make us look stupid," he said, pointing at Rachel as she reached the door. "Coming in here, acting like some big shot. You think you're better than us?" The room murmured, some nodding, others looking down like they didn't want to be part of it, but couldn't look away. Rachel stopped, her hand on the door handle, and turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. She didn't raise her voice, didn't step closer. She just said, "I don't think about you at all." The words were calm, but they hit like a slap, sharp and final. The man's face reddened further, his hands dropping to his sides as he muttered something under his breath. The suits followed Rachel out their steps, silent, their presence like a shadow that swallowed the room's light. The shop stayed silent, but not for long. Within minutes, every surveillance camera on the block went dark, 15 minutes of nothing under an emergency order from Washington. A black SUV pulled up outside its windows, tinted, its engine idling with a low hum. Rachel slid into the back without a word, her canvas wallet still tucked under her arm, her sneakers leaving faint dust marks on the pavement. The convoy vanished into an unmarked zone, leaving the town buzzing with whispers like a hive that had been stirred. Leaks started trickling out. Raven, the strategic reflex kill assassin from Deep Unit 9, had resurfaced. Marty rewatched the shop's security footage, his hands shaking as he clicked through the frames. But the part showing Rachel was gone, erased like she'd never stood there, never touched the Glock, never fired the Colt. All that remained was the target on the range wall, 5 perfect bullet holes untouched, like a signature no one dared erase. The shop's regulars would walk by it, their voices dropping to murmurs, their eyes lingering on the silhouette like it was a relic. A week later, a local reporter came into the shop, his notebook open, his pen poised. He'd heard the rumors, caught wind of the story, and wanted to know more. He asked Marty about the woman, about the target, about the suits. Marty's face closed up, his hands fidgeting with a rag as he wiped the counter. "Don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice flat, but his eyes darted to the range door. The reporter pressed, mentioning border post K-219 Operation White Decoy. The old man in the baseball cap, sitting in the corner with a coffee, looked up, his hands tightening around his cup. "She was here," he said, his voice low but firm. "And she was real." The reporter scribbled furiously, but Marty cut him off, saying the shop had no comment. The target stayed on the wall, a silent witness to a truth no one could erase. The fallout came fast, and it wasn't kind. Trevor posted a shaky video online trying to laugh off the day, till his voice high and nervous as he recounted the story to his followers. It backfired. The comments tore him apart, Calling him out for mocking a hero, for thinking his gold chain and loud mouth made him untouchable. His sponsorship with a local gym chain got yanked within a week, the company issuing a statement about aligning with their values. Derek, the security guard, was let go from his job. After his boss saw the footage, his tough guy act didn't sit well with the company, especially when whispers of Rachel's identity started spreading. Marty didn't lose his job, but he stopped talking about that day. He'd flinch whenever someone mentioned the Glock or the Colt, like the memory was a live wire. Claire tried to spin the story at her book club, painting herself as a bystander who knew something was up, but no one bought it. Her friends stopped inviting her to brunches, tired of her fake apologies and her need to be the center of every story. The old man from K219 wrote a letter to the local paper, his handwriting shaky, but sure telling his story of that night at the border post, how a woman with Rachel's face had pulled his unit out of hell. It never got published, but he kept a copy folded in his wallet next to a photo of his grandkids, their smiles bright against the faded paper. Rachel didn't see any of it. She was gone, pulled back into a world that didn't exist on paper, a world of unmarked zones and orders that came in plain envelopes. The shop stayed quiet for weeks, the air heavy with what they'd all witnessed. People would walk by the range, glance at the target still hanging on the wall, and lower their voices like they were in a church. The 5 bullet holes were a reminder not of anger, not of revenge, but of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Rachel didn't gloat. She didn't turn back to rub it in. She just kept walking, her sneakers kicking up dust on a road no one else could see. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was power. It was the kind of strength that doesn't need a spotlight because it changes the room just by being there. For everyone who's ever been looked down on, who's felt the sting of a stranger's laugh, who's carried their truth in silence, Rachel's story wasn't just hers. It was theirs. It was proof that you don't need to scream to be seen. Sometimes you just need to stand steady and quiet and let the world catch up. Where were you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.